Welcome again, and thank you for being here. Just to give you some background on Sharita, Sharita Towne is a transdisciplinary artist born and raised in Oregon, Washington, and California. She is most interested in creating interdisciplinary community art projects that engage local and global Black geographies, histories, and possibilities. Sharita is an assistant professor in Intermedia, Thesis and Critical Studies at Pacific Northwest College of Art. She is a 2015 Art Matters grantee, a 2019 Open Signal New Media Fellow, 2019 Precipice Awardee, 2019 by POC IPRC resident, and a 2019 Creative Capital grantee. And I would just like to thank you for being here.
Hi. I'm really glad that there's a small group today. I think at this time of year as a teacher, I'm just like so depleted. Like all the smart things have already come out of my mouth for like the entire spring. And so it's like this brain mouth kind of a thing. So, yeah, we're going to keep it pretty low key today. I will say that when Stephanie Parrish asked me to do this, I was like, yeah, I think so. Because I was like very busy. And it feels like it was like 10 years ago, but it was like 6 months ago. And I was like, yeah. And I didn't really even know what it entailed. But I was like, I like Stephanie. I'll say yes. And so then I figured out what it entailed, which is picking a piece of art in the permanent collection and talking about it. And so I definitely want this to be more of like an artist chat than an artist talk. But I brought some kind of source material that I wanted to bring into the chat. Yeah, so I kind of grappled with what to pick because I came to the museum and I saw the Mickalene Thomas piece and I remember that it was recently acquired. And I remember when Mickalene Thomas was here a year or two ago with her talk with Sarah Krajewski, she kind of like sat in the chair and was like, when are y'all gonna get a piece of my work? And I really liked that. And so it looked like that kind of nudging worked and there's a work. So I was excited to see a piece in the museum that reflects my childhood. Those women in that piece are, much like the reason that Mickalene made it, like we have to celebrate the mentors and the muses that kind of put Black femininity in all its form in the forefront. So I was really excited, but then all of a sudden I had this realization where I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to talk about this with strangers. And so then I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna pick that piece and talk about it. And so I looked back through the permanent collection online, tried to pick another one. I was just like, there's nothing else I really want to speak to or talk about. So I was like, I'm going to be brave. And if anybody in the group says anything like racist or sexist or homophobic or transphobic, it's going to be okay. I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna deal with it. So I'm also very glad that there's less humans because then if it is uncomfortable, it's like less uncomfortable because there's only like 5 of us. So that's good. Great. So yeah, we're gonna talk a lot about the people in this piece. I wanted to start with just kind of naming the singers and comedians that I recognize in it. Because I really much like citation, hence all these books. And the reason that I also brought all these books is because in the original installation of Mickalene Thomas, when she first showed this work in like 2016 when she made it, very much a part of her practice, like this kind of collage of different fabrics and pillows and chairs and a place to sit and a whole ambiance of like a home or a living room, right? And in that living room were stacks of books, right? So she both made this homage and collage to the singers and comedians that she says, made her who she is. And she also brought in those texts and those writers that also were very influential and very important. So I wanted to share some of those today. But so here's some of the comedians and singers I recognize. Some more: Monique, Whitney Houston, Nina Simone, Josephine Baker, Donna Summers, that comedian actress from Night Court. I had to look it up because I didn't remember her name. Marsha Warfield, Wanda Sykes, Eartha Kitt, Moms Mabley, Whoopi Goldberg, Cheryl Underwood, Adele Givens. Adele Givens is the one that says, "Do I look like a fucking lady?" Naomi Sims, Pam Grier, Diane Carroll, LaWanda Page, Millie Jackson. Millie Jackson has the Fuck You Symphony, one of my favorite things ever. So I just wanted to name them into this space, and kind of just in seeing them and thinking about what I would talk about, I kind of went on YouTube and looked through some clips, which is similar to how, Mickalene Thomas made this piece, was just surfing through YouTube. And I just kind of had this memory lane of being a kid and moving up and down the West Coast and not always being able to find community in the new places that we moved to, and just watching Def Comedy Jam and watching Comedy Jam, different comedy shows on BET to get a sense of self. And when I'm watching it now, I was thinking about kind of the kid that I was, and then the teenager I became, and now the adult that I am. And I just was, and still am, much more fearful than the women that you see that use that platform as a space for political discourse. They're just so bold, and they're very aware of the platform that they have and what they're doing and what they're kind of standing up against. And so as a kid, there was some of them that I was even afraid of, because there was a piece of me inside of myself that I couldn't understand or fully embrace yet. Like when Aretha Franklin just passed last year, I remembered being a kid and remember hearing her voice for the first time and being kind of afraid, because it just stirred something so deep in me, a type of grief or despair or pain that I only had flecks of, but something about not wanting to have to fully take it on as a Black woman. As you grow older, you know that it's kind of coming. So I kind of shirked that as a kid and was a tomboy and things. So as I watch this and I get to celebrate them, it's also to celebrate myself fully in ways that we're not always taught. So I just wanted to actually read a transcript of Mickalene Thomas talking about this art. It was the time when you could easily go on YouTube and rip stuff, which was exciting for me, because once I learned how to do it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I can actually pull segments from videos that I responded to. I just knew that these were comedians I was interested in, and I knew that they were saying things that resonated with me, and it made sense. These women were using the stage as a platform. There was this deliverance in this way of being able to tell a story and make people laugh and also make them feel uncomfortable at the same time. And then I started thinking of the comedian as this orator or godly person. There's also messages within the humor. It's such a male-dominated field. And so when a woman is entering that platform, they seem to find a way to speak about their sexuality, their bodies, and their desires. I feel like they have helped me become an artist, and they have grounded me and given me that foundation to create and make the type of art that I'm making. So it's like all of these women represent for me a reminder of myself and of that slight possibility of how things can change at any moment. I also was thinking about how this is in some way almost like a self-portrait of Mickalene Thomas. In sifting through YouTube and picking all the clips that resound with her, resound for her, she's also kind of selecting these, we're experiencing these pieces as filtered through Mickalene Thomas. If I sit on YouTube and I Google some more, or Adele Givens, or Whitney Houston, I might pick some different clips, right? I will probably pick some more tragic ones, just as my personality. So we're also seeing kind of a self-portrait of Mickalene Thomas, but we're also kind of seeing a self-portrait of the type of clips that Black people upload to YouTube. We're seeing which ones are important to hold on to through time as well, right? So, and as viewers, I think it's important that we also all see ourselves in it, even if we didn't grow up in Orange, New Jersey, or Houston, Texas, or these same places that some of these women are from, and we don't have their same experience, I think we're all implicated in the machine that doesn't celebrate their voices and craft as much as some other artists, right? And so to see ourselves in it and find the ways that some of the things that they might say make us uncomfortable, right? So it's also a reflection on us when we watch it. I want to read another thing here, which is quite long. And I wondered, because this is a piece that's like a kaleidoscope, that's one of the words Mickalene Thomas uses to describe it. It's a kaleidoscope of kind of a collective voice of all of these people. I just thought we could kind of pass the mic and each read pieces from this, which I'll describe to you what it is. It's a comedian that's actually not featured in that piece, named Neale. And I transcribed this from YouTube because I liked this kind of collapse between like text and the YouTube and the books, because Mickalene, in the original installation, she had all these books in the gallery, in the space as well. So I wanted to kind of bring a comedian's testimony to what it's like to be a Black woman comedian. What that work actually looks like. So yeah, I guess I will read the first paragraph and then maybe pass it along, and we'll each read a little bit if that's okay. Okay, great. So my name is Neale. My age is undisclosed. You can Wikipedia me. And I'm a stand-up comedian, an actress. Why do we not see more Black female comedians celebrated by the mainstream media? It's a question we ask ourselves. We're certainly out here working. We're certainly selling tickets. We're certainly pleasing crowds all across the country and out of the country. I think that nobody really cares what female comedians are doing. The men dominate this industry, and that's where the focus is. Comedians are already sort of the last renegade entertainers, and the female comics is almost invisible. The female Black comic is just, they don't focus on us at all. The people who pull the strings are not of our color, and they just don't think about it. It's like if you live your whole life and you have only white friends, you don't really think about the fact that you don't have any Black ones. It just doesn't cross their minds because it's not something that they're even thinking about. So this next paragraph, like imagine she's like doing her makeup and saying this, because that's what the clip cuts to right there.
I never have an average day. Every day is different. My day can change with a phone call, so it's hard to make plans. Yeah, very rarely do I feel like I'm coasting. Every now and then you hit a stride where everything feels good and like all the stars have lined up and stuff like that, and it's a good week. But most of the time you feel like grinding, 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 grinding.
Well, I do believe that Sherry Shepherd is doing some very, very great work. And I don't believe that Amy Schumer or anybody is doing anything better than Sherry could do it. The machine's not behind Sherry, but it could be, and it should be.
Which one is it?
Oh, the fourth one.
This one. I'm not in competition with the girls that I work with. We're friendly and we're cool, and you know we pull for each other, and I'm happy to see there's so few of us that get put on. I'm happy when I do see one of us go, you know? Like I'm not in competition with Samor or Sherry or Lonnie or anything like that. I do like it when the good people win.
Thank you. Of course. I do think women in general absolutely feel ignored as a comedian. You walk into a green room where a bunch of guys are laughing and joking. You walk in and they stop talking, or you walk in and change the subject, or they all leave. You walk into a club and sign up on the list to go up, if that's the way they run their club, and they just keep on calling everybody but you. We don't feel ignored. We are ignored a lot of the time. They act like you're not alive, because it's still at the end of the day old boys club, just like damn golf or some shit. When they partner up a guy in a cop film, they don't think that maybe the partner could be a girl. We have to prove ourselves 10 times more. Every time we say something like that, people scoff at us and think which is being menstrual and being overdramatic, and it's absolutely the truth.
I couldn't do the same material for older people as I do for younger people. You have to be more relevant, not going to do the same material in the South as I do in the East.
I change my material to suit whoever I'm with, but the message is the same all the time, and I'm always talking about sex or whatever and self-esteem. And lifting yourself up and people accepting one another for who they are and all that kind of good stuff. So the message remains the same, just a different delivery depending on where we're at.
Well, if I am talking to young black females that are fired up to do comedy, I just say you better grow some very, very thick alligator skin, because this job is not for the weak. It ain't no joke. It is not glamorous at all until way later, and it's a grind. And when it's bad, it is really, really bad. But when it's great, it's wonderful. And if it's in your soul and in your heart, then you should do it. Don't do it because everybody thinks you're funny at the barbecue. The only reason to really do comedy is that you would die if you were.
That's it. Cool. Thanks for reading that with me. When I transcribed this from the YouTube video, and this is Lunel getting ready to go on stage, so she's just saying all this stuff very matter-of-factly, very plainly, just putting on makeup, getting out the car, and it's so poignant and so true. And I think that comedians and these singers, there's just such a deep reservoir of truth in Black women comedians and Black women singers. And they have such a responsibility, I think, of sharing a certain kind of spatial knowledge, right? So when she says, I don't talk the same, you do the same material for older people or younger people or in the South or in the East, I'm thinking about growing up and moving up and down the West Coast and watching Def Comedy Jam and being introduced to the South through the comedians that were on that show, and being introduced to New York by their response to those comedians from the South, right? And so I think that there's a very particular way that the clips that we see in there's a certain, I'm not just thinking about them as this kind of two-dimensional representation in the museum or as this thing in a screen that was part of my childhood. I'm also thinking about kind of the spatial reality of what it was like for them to grow up in certain neighborhoods, experience certain things inside of different institutions or at work or in jails or in hospitals. And so they're kind of speaking a truth to an entire structure and an entire country, an entire world that I think it's very much worth study, right? Kara Keeling in The Witch's Flight, a book where she kind of unpacks movies like Set It Off and other Black, queer, lesbian film moments and other moments of Black women in Hollywood. She describes kind of the need to watch these films and study them to create kind of an explosion, so that we explode these systems of oppression and white supremacy, because they're actually showing us the way by just speaking their truth into spaces. And so I very much like looking at that as a type of study. I have a few little things I could keep reading, but I also wanted to maybe, if anyone feels so called, to just mention a piece that you recognize or remember, or a person, be it Eartha Kitt or Nina Simone or any of the people that you might see in that, and just kind of talk about where you were when you were aware of this person in media. If there's any volunteers. And I also have the list of people here if you want to look around at it, pass that around.
So Eartha Kitt, I have a big crush on Eartha Kitt. And I went to NYU. I was an undergrad in New York, and I saved up all my work-study money to go see her play at the Cafe Carlyle, which she had a standing show there. This is like the early 90s. So she had a standing show there. It was like a $80 ticket, so it was crazy expensive for me to buy that ticket, and it was a 2-drink minimum. But it was a really tiny room. The Cafe Carlyle is in the super fancy hotel. It's in the Carlyle Hotel on the Upper East Side. And I had to go do this. It was like my bucket list. I didn't really know what a bucket list was back then, but it was on my bucket list. And so I went with a friend, and it's like one of those like top 10 magical experiences. Like I sat in this booth and I ordered 2 drinks, and I couldn't afford it at the time, but it was magical. And I've always like just had this thing for her. Can't describe it, but I have a thing.
Oh, sure. Oh man, dang, it's hard. Okay, for Eartha Kitt, the first time I have a memory of her is I've been talking with one of my sisters around how a lot of the black films from the 90s I have not seen fully. Like I would only see little pieces as a child. And I feel like my first real kind of memory of her is in that movie Boomerang. But I still haven't seen that full movie. And I just remember, I just have this image of her. And I mean, for people who've seen the movie, just like, it's interesting. So I wasn't introduced to like her, the like kind of younger image of her until maybe, I don't know, a teenager or something. And also just, I would say Whitney Houston, just because I think I would have been 5 or 6 or 7 when she had her songs, and she was just, she was like that's what I'll say, yeah. Or anyone, who else, I don't know.
So I'm hard of hearing and I'm going deaf, so I could pick someone off this list, but who I really wanted to talk about is someone who's not on this list. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Doris Hickman. She was this amazing black woman who taught at an all-white school in inner city Seattle where I went, a Catholic school, and we only had a couple of people of color in our entire school. She was amazing. She taught me so much, and she was my favorite teacher that I had in my entire grade school, maybe my entire career, and I have a college degree, because her dignity and her strength, because the time that she was teaching there was when the riots were going on in Seattle after Dr. King was assassinated, and how she taught us by her example. And she never let anyone bully anyone else in her class. I remember one time in front of the whole class, she stood up for me when someone was bullying me. And she also made it like a funny reference about it and got everyone to laugh and to see the humor in the fact that it wasn't okay for this kid to bully me. And it was such a profound experience because it created this safety in our class. And I was so amazed at how could she do that? She could come in to this sea of whiteness and be this incredible example of someone who was totally herself, totally comfortable with who she was, totally comfortable with her culture, and she was sharing it with us. It was the very beginning of Black History Month in February, and we got to do a play, and we got to have different parts in it, and it just, for me, I wish I'd had her for the rest of my experience in school, because it was sort of like an ocean of serenity and sanity and humor and fun in the midst of a really seriously difficult time. And so I think of her, and I could talk about a lot of other amazing women I've known, but I think I've talked plenty long. So thanks for this opportunity to share.
just going to observe, in my own experience, I am not a consumer of media. I have never owned a television. I don't watch television. I mostly don't see movies. So I know a lot of these names as names, but I will admit that I did not recognize a single person in what I watched. So this is like really making me aware of this huge blank spot in my experience. And it's partly because they're black, but more because it's popular culture in a way that's just not part of my life.
So I have an experience actually with Whoopi Goldberg. Mixed experience, not fully positive. So for me, positive at first when I was little, I loved Ghost. I loved the Sister Acts. I really liked her a lot. I thought she was amazing. And I was actually at my aunt's house, and I was watching one of her films, probably one of the Sister Act films. And I remember looking at Whoopi Goldberg and then looking at my aunt who was laughing about something. And I realized they had a similar smile. So I told him, I was like, oh, you have the same smile as Whoopi Goldberg. How cool is that? And my aunt was not happy with that. She was just like, really? And I was like, yeah, why? What's wrong? And she was like, I think she's ugly. She looks like a man. And so I learned a lot in that moment about blackness, beauty, femininity, some of the like deeper things that like the women in my family are dealing with, pressures, expectations. So in that moment, a lot was communicated to me about, like, what are these standards, you know? Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, it's already almost 7 o'clock. And I guess we get to go have chats and a bevy in the cafe. But before we do that, I'm just going to read from a few things, because, you know, in the kind of spirit of collage from Mickalene and bringing in comedians and singers, and in other iterations of this work, writers, I just wanted to bring in some more voice. Like, I'm interested in there being a multiple kind of voice and collective voice here. And so I was reminded of another time that I talked at the museum, and Intizar was there as well, where we had a kaleidoscope conversation, which is a conversation composed entirely of questions. So for about 40 minutes, we sat in a circle, not unlike this one, and just raised questions about an exhibition at the time on Black representation. And so I just wanted to read a bit. I transcribed the entire conversation into this book. And it's a quick read, it's about like 20 minutes, but are we asking the right questions? How do we evaluate these works outside of the Western canon that we're all very tempted to evaluate these works under? Is it possible to evaluate these works outside of the Western canon in a space that is itself defined by that canon? How do you feel? What if I were to tell you that I feel odd? What if I were to tell you that it was okay? How do we address the lack of contemporary artists in these works in this collection? What does this exhibition look like opening in a month besides February? What does it feel like to ask the questions that we want to ask? And then I want to read, this is a Zora Neale Hurston reader. I love myself when I'm laughing, and then again when I'm looking mean and impressive. And there's a foreword by Alice Walker about Zora Neale Hurston that I just wanted to read the start of how Alice Walker frames Zora Neale Hurston. On refusing to be humbled by second place in a contest you did not design, a tradition by now. A friend of mine called one day to tell me that she and another woman had been discussing Zora Neale Hurston and had decided they wouldn't have liked her. They wouldn't have liked the way, when her play Color Struck won second prize in a literary contest at the beginning of her career, Hurston walked into a room full of her competitors, flung her scarf dramatically over her shoulder, and yelled, color struck at the top of her voice. Apparently, it isn't easy to like a person who is not humbled by second place. Zora Neale Hurston was outrageous, it appears, by nature. She was quite capable of saying, writing, or doing things different than what one might have wished. Because she recognized the contradictions and complexity of her own personality, Robert Hemingway, her biographer, writes that Hurston came to delight in the chaos that she sometimes left behind. Yet for all her contrariness, her chaos, her ability to stir up dislike that is as strong today as it was 50 years ago, many of us love Zora Neale Hurston. We do not love her for her lack of modesty. That tends to amuse us. An assertive black person during Hurston's time was considered an anomaly. We do not love her for her unpredictable and occasionally weird politics. They tend to confuse us. We do not certainly applaud many of the mad things she is alleged to have said, and sometimes actually did say. We do not even claim to never dislike her. In reading through the 30-odd year span of her writing, most of us, I imagine, find her alternately winning and appalling, but rarely dull, which is worth a lot. We love Zora Neale Hurston for her work first, and then again, as she and all of Eatonville would say, we love her for herself, for the humor and courage with which she encountered a life she infrequently designed, for her absolute disinterest in becoming either white or bourgeois, and for her devoted appreciation of her own culture, which is an inspiration to us all. I pulled that quote because I just was kind of, and I'll end there, I won't read the rest of these things. It's nice to come to this museum and be reminded of some of those comedians and singers who I both delighted in and loved, but also that I was afraid of, because afraid of the parts in me that couldn't be that bold or loud, and kind of love them for them. You know, I think that that's a huge work, an ongoing work, and so I'm glad that that's the first piece that has been acquired by the museum, is one that reminds us to love them for them and to also love those pieces of ourselves that is them that they gave us. So thanks. Let's go have chats or bevies down the stairs. Thanks. Yeah.